Welcome to the Moon God Pod. I'm your host, JwowLax, aka Jason Harrell, and today we have a very special guest. He was one of my first mentors in the world of broadcasting and journalism, and this is a guy that knows the facts. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Alan Duke. Just to give some background, Alan was working at CNN at the time as a producer of what was called the CNN Student Bureau. And this is going to date me, but it was about 20 years ago, 2001. And this gentleman got a phone call from me. I don't exactly know how we got connected per se, but I was trying to get an internship at the coveted CNN Sports Illustrated department, and they filled up spots. And the guy said, sorry, we're out of spots, but there's a guy that might be able to take you on, and give him a call. And we connected, and I don't know if I remember it. My memory is a little fuzzy, but I basically felt like you were like, okay, you got the gig. If you show up Monday morning, be here at like 10 a.m. If not, don't bother coming. And I basically uprooted my entire life, headed down to Atlanta, and met you. And wow. For me personally, what a life-changing experience, because most interns, just fetch coffee and we just hit the ground running. And for a 19-year-old guy, you set my life on a different trajectory, which is what AKU is all about, is kind of realizing kind of these impossible dreams. And for you, I appreciate that. You were a big step for my career, my life. So welcome. And that's kind of how we know each other to begin with.
Remind me, where were you going to college?
Appalachian State.
That's right. Well, you see, that's what impressed me, because I had just not long before that been on that campus up and driven through it. And so, and also every now and then that school pulls off an upset in football. So
they didn't pull any upsets when I was going to school there.
No, but it's a special place, is my point. I remember anybody who's crazy enough to go up and to trust their college education up in the mountains like that must be a real ambitious go-getter to think that they can make that work. And you did.
Well, some people could argue.
You recall we had, I think, probably 15 or 20 people like you, interns, that summer, right? Yes. And if you go and track them down now, they're places. They've gone places. They're morning host in big city morning shows, that kind of thing, or running newsrooms in various parts of the country or world. And that was what CNN Student Bureau was, because I was at CNN at that time. I'd been there when we started CNN Student Bureau, I'd been there about 10 years. And Ted Turner came up with this idea, hey, why don't we work with the kids in colleges and high schools around the world and teach them journalism? And then Tom Johnson, who was the CEO of CNN, said, I know a young guy. He didn't know how old I was. He thought I was a young guy who can do this. And so he picked me to create it and be managing editor. And my whole theory was, let's get as many of these young people here and let's build them a newsroom and let them do this stuff. And so every day for like several years, a CNN Student Bureau reporter had a story on CNN. Mm-hmm. And so it was great. And you were great. And you're right in 2001. It was right before 9/11, right?
That's correct.
And we were in that ramp up. We didn't know 9/11. By the way, I did not know 9/11 was about to happen. Those conspiracies are not true.
Right.
But we were ramping up actually to take a whole bunch of people to New York in the middle of September. I don't know if you knew this.
I didn't.
But I'd been traveling the world to third world countries all over the world, training young people, and we were all converging in New York. We had built a newsroom at the UN, where the UN's Children's Summit, that was going to be the middle, like the 15th and 16th of September. If that attack had been a week later, or we'd been a week earlier, I would have been in the middle of New York with people like you from all over the world that we had trained. Could you imagine that? That just blows my mind, because you were it was when digital cameras were just coming out, digital editing. Yeah. Apple was supporting us at the time, and we had early versions, like we were on Final Cut Pro 3, I think, at the time. Mm-hmm. and with the just out G4 computers that we were installing. And so it was a great time. And I'm glad to hear that it was a special time that made a difference in your life, because that was what it was all about. And it really, I think, comes around to where we are today. And we can talk about that.
So let me just, there's two stories that I think are very interesting. And then I want to get to exactly what you're saying, like where we are today. So there's two stories. One, to pivot off or to go with the 9/11, because of the contacts that I made at CNN, I was able to do things. The Atlanta Hawks happened to have the third pick in the draft that year, I believe. And
I recall, and you became one of their star forwards. No, that was another intern. I'm sorry.
That was another Jason. Yeah. But I got to, you taught me, like, basically it was kind of one of those, like, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And I just walked down there with a camera and interviewed the players right alongside ESPN, Sports Illustrated, Fox, all those big boys. And nobody questioned it, and they should have, but they didn't. And
you had a CNN ID.
Yeah. But that was, at 19, you don't know how the game works. And I learned very early that. And so I was able to do a story on all the high school players going pro. And it was like the story of the day of the draft. And, you taught me how to, like, pitch a story, because, I was like, well, I put this together and you approved it. You were like, great. But you took me into the room with the producers and, like, I had to pitch it. And it was interesting how, like, you could package something. So my pitch to the producers was, I've got a story about these 18-year-old kids that are taking $1 million jobs and skipping college. Instead of packaging it as just a sports story, it was like I packaged it that way, and people were, like, interested in it. Whereas if it had just been a sports story, it would have been like a snooze fest. Right. So that was interesting. Now the 9/11, and this is just kind of a funny story. You also
9/11 is full of funny.
Well, so you actually got me a contact that connected me with Inside the NBA, because Ernie Johnson was my hero, and he's who I kind of aspired to be. So I managed to wiggle my way in and meet Ernie, and kind of at nighttime I would go to Inside the NBA and hang out with him. At which time my basketball hero Charles Barkley was working there, as he still is today, and I got to hang out with him. And one night, now I think the statute of limitations are good, but it was me, him, Patrick Ewing, the rest of the TNT crew, and we were out at a bar, and Charles gets a phone call, and he's in his cups at the time. He's had a couple drinks, and it's Michael Jordan. And he hangs up the phone, and he says, and I don't think you remember this, but he hangs up the phone and says to Patrick, he's like, MJ just told me he's coming back, wants me to come help work out with him. I sat there and I was so excited because as a fan, I was like, Michael Jordan's coming back. I told you that. And you were like, well, you got to run with this. You got to do this story. And you said to me, and I was like, I can't do that. Charles is my friend. He's like, well, do you want to be friends with him, or do you want to be a journalist? And I was like, well, I kind of just want to be friends with him. I should have taken the journalist thing.
Y'all are guy like this right now, right?
Oh, totally. He I'm sure he'd remember me. But what's so interesting is the day before, it was actually like the September 10th, that night, there was a girl that was a producer at CNN-SI, and I told her this, and she was like, you don't have any facts or whatever. Like, no one believed it. No one thought Michael was going to come back. She called me that night before September 11th, and she goes, hey, remember that crazy story you told me about Michael Jordan? She's like, we just got a leak that he's having a press conference tomorrow morning to announce he's coming back. So, true story. I get up, go to class at 8 o'clock. 9/11 happens. I'm in class, so I don't know. I go to my next class at 9:30 and there's no social media or cell phones or anything. So I walk in.
We had cell phones.
Well, the Nokias. So I walk into class at 9:30. The towers have already been hit. And my professor says, he's like, I guess everyone's heard the big news by now. And like an idiot, I blurted out,
it's about Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan's coming back to the NBA.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. We didn't have smartphones then.
Yeah.
That was the difference.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to look on a computer and you had a laptop, you had to have a connection to the internet. And who had Wi-Fi then?
Right.
Pretty rare at that time.
I had to go to computer labs to do homework, and
you did homework.
Well, I went to computer labs.
Okay.
Yeah.
To check the sports scores.
get the computer in the corner by myself, So,
right.
So
to check your AOL mail.
There's some memory lane stories. But you were saying, especially in connection with like kind of this Aku project that, I'm very passionate about. And, you're a fact checker. You've done some research on our creator, Micah Johnson, and the project. I give you the mic.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about Micah's baseball career.
Yeah.
I'm a Braves fan. I got my Braves hat right back there. He was with the Braves, right, for a minute?
For a minute, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so, and the Dodgers. I like to go to Dodger games. Did I go to a Dodger game with you once? Did you come to town?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, with Will, right?
Yeah, Will Frampton.
He actually went to a Dodgers game a few years ago. Yeah, let me give you a little perspective. This is, and you may remember me doing the same kind of speech 22 years ago when you were my intern, because I was always trying to make sure that you young people or former young people understood the timeline of history, because that's the timeline of the future. There's nothing new. It's a timeline and things happen. And if you get ahead of the timeline, there's not a darn thing you can do about it, which is part of what CNN Student Bureau was. I don't know how much you were involved in it, but this process, but I organized basically a committee of people. We'd meet once a week for a year or two at CNN, producers, young people, old people. We would get in a conference room up near my office, and we would brainstorm about what the future was and what we could do now to own the future. And we did white papers, we did pilot programs, we did focus groups, that sort of thing. And a lot of the lessons that I learned then are still applicable now. But the ideas that we came up with in 2000 and 2001 and 2002 are ideas that exist today, but they didn't happen in those years. They might have happened 10 years later or 5 years later, because the technology, the bandwidth. You remember in 2001, how we were talking about Wi-Fi. You didn't have just Wi-Fi everywhere in the air. You had to plug into a wire, right? To, right. Ethernet, generally. It was several years before we would have, the smartphone. But things were happening. There was technology at that time was there to do everything pretty much that we were doing 10 years later, or even 15 years later, but everything hadn't come together. The interoperability of everything. Like, you got to have a convergence of bandwidth, like Wi-Fi. You've got to have, and it's got to be everywhere. It's got to be ubiquitous. You've got to have storage, like, a hard drive. If I told you that I had a thumb drive now that holds a terabyte of data, back then you would have thought I was damn crazy. Because I wouldn't have had it then. It might have, when you were like, had an external hard drive then, it was like a little tower that was about this big, that might be like 25 gigs.
Right.
And you used it for video editing. Like if you had one of the Apple G4 laptops, which I have them stacked up in a closet here, they aren't worth, someday for the auction, right? But you couldn't do everything you could think about then. Like I don't know if you remember this, we had a 360-degree streaming camera that was provided to me by Intel. At that time, it cost $20,000. And it was like this glass with a glass donut on this little thing that had a thing shooting up. Mostly we used it on the show. You remember the show we did in the CNN Center called Talk Back Live?
Yeah, with Bonnie.
They had the camera in the middle, and you could and viewers could watch the show on TV, but then log on and view if they had enough bandwidth. They could like access that stream and like see whatever they wanted to in that circular audience.
Around, yeah.
Like, that was called the Be Here Cam, and it was developed with Intel technology by another company. And they gave me one of them to use, and they would give me the latest. I remember in 2000 or 2001, I think they'd just come out with the 1 gigahertz processor.
Wow.
And previously, I remember when 125, megs or whatever was like big, but now it's just like, but you had Moore's law, right? Everything doubles every so often.
Right.
Well, the problem was the ideas that we were coming up in that little committee were great and real, but we couldn't do them because you didn't have, only 10% of the country, maybe in the summer of 2001, had access to broadband. And the definition of broadband then was 300K a second. Mm-hmm. You know what 300K a second would give you now? A big headache. You can't do it. I mean, I'm getting 10 megs on my iPhone, and I might be happy then, right?
Right.
But you just had to have that had to have bandwidth, you had to have storage, you had to have processor, all of that coming together. But in 2001, it wasn't there. Our ideas were there, and we had them, and we could imagine it, but we couldn't deliver it. And if we could simulate it on some basis, it wasn't economically viable. It would be too expensive for all that storage and all that. So we were coming up with these great ideas for things that essentially were like YouTube, right, and things like that. Interactive television, which is now like Twitter is essentially interactive television, because people are watching the show and they tweet on their phones about the show coming actually in real progress. They're live tweeting, right? That's what interactive television is. We were thinking about how would you do that then? Because we knew that the youngsters, you were 19, you guys, you didn't watch. We did focus groups, and one of the most profound things I remember seeing in a focus group, and keep in mind, I was like 2001, I was like old. I was like 44 years old already, right? Already. So imagine what I am now. I was learning, like, the youngsters in our focus group were telling us that they don't watch news. They want information, right? And things that related to them. Like if they were into drums or music, they wanted information about drums or music. They didn't want like that there was a car crash down the road on the interstate, blah, blah, blah kind of thing.
I haven't had TV or like what I consider like cable in probably 10 years.
Well, nor have I.
And because everything I get, like
you unplug. Well, people, we saw that coming, because when people who were 19 then, who are now are unplugged, we saw that coming, that the design. So we were thinking, how do you deal with that? What do you do with? Well, the problem was business-wise, you couldn't do anything, because like at CNN's large percentage of and they were making a lot of money. The large percentage of it was coming in the fees that the cable operators paid them for the programming, like so many dollars a month per subscriber, right? And it added up when you have 80 million subscribers. So CNN, that's what their business model was. The ads, but it was the cable operators. So they couldn't do anything that went against the cable operator.
Right.
On our website, we had a CNN Student Bureau website. They would allow us to put one piece of video on that site every day, and it had to be a piece of video that wasn't specifically edited to be on CNN, because the cable operator said, we're paying for that already.
That makes sense.
So that was stifling what you could do. And it wasn't until the cable operators, all right, who are the cable operators now? Can you name one?
Spectrum.
Yeah, but the bandwidth I'm using right now to talk to you is Spectrum Wi-Fi bandwidth coming into so they are now the internet providers. Back then, they were just the cable programming provider.
Correct.
Once Spectrum, which didn't exist then, it's all in evolution. Once the cable operators suddenly were evolved into not caring about cable, and they don't so much. They care about the distribution of bandwidth. That's when you're able to do all these things. But before that, they wouldn't, they like CNN, they wouldn't let us do anything innovative that would threaten their business. So that's what we were. So there's all those things that keep innovation from going from here out and becoming profitable. And that's where we're going to get to 2023.
Mm-hmm. And
you're talking about, what was your first phone? What model was your first phone?
I had a brick phone.
Wait, literally a brick?
It was the big.
Really, like if you wanted to call somebody, you just threw it at them?
Pretty much, yeah. That it was like a big heavy one, and then I had like my real first cell phone that I used that wasn't like an like the bag phone. But then I had like, I never got the Nokia one with the snake game on it.
Was the brick heavy?
You know what? Like, I definitely had to wear a belt because if I kept it in my pants, it would fall down. So
keep it in your pants. I always advised you of that.
Yes.
I want to show you my first phone. Can you see this? It weighs 32 pounds. And
of course.
And it's not battery powered. I have to crank it here to even make a call. And I have to get on. Flo, could you connect me? I need to call Jason.
All right.
VR549. That's his number. Anyway, so this was my first phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea how old I am.
Of course.
But the thing is, Jason, that phone's outdated now, but it did the same thing your phone does, your brick phone does.
Right.
Same thing, right? It was just less convenient.
So where are we at in terms, like?
Well, let me show you the next phone.
The next phone. Ah, there we go.
Do you have this? You have Oculus?
No, not yet.
Not yet. They only cost like, I think this was like $300 or something like that.
Yeah, right? I'm a little. I'm late.
Come on.
So
wait, I got to go. I got a date. Oh baby. The point is, this is coming instead. I mean, that's where we're going. We're already there. But the thing is, those aren't out there. Like, for
those that can't see the video and are listening to the audio, he just.
Oh God, I forgot. This is, some people are just listening. I held up a 1915 Kellogg phone, the kind you see in the old movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I put on Oculus headset. Okay. I'm sorry, we got it for the seeing impaired. We need to do closed captioning here.
And you're kind of talking like Ready Player One, like that's where we're heading, kind of.
Of course. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg is betting the bank on the metaverse, right? Change the name of Facebook to Meta, right?
So what's interesting, because I would like to hear your insight on Facebook, because there's not a lot of the biggest problem with Web3 is like you have all these like creators and these projects that are there's this big gold rush to the metaverse, and whoever kind of can figure it out, and I would bet that Zucks could figure it out because he's got the most money to figure it out. But it's very difficult to kind of keep the community in tabs. And now what's really interesting with a Web3 or an NFT project is we all feel like investors because we own these NFTs and we've invested in these creators. Whereas like if I own stock in Facebook, like even as a stockholder, it's not like I can call up Zucks and be like, hey, why are you doing this? Or what are you up to? Like, because really I can't, besides changing the name and knowing that he's dedicated a ton of money and he's building something, nobody really knows what Facebook is doing. Now, Instagram and Micah actually collaborated in January, and that was Instagram's first foray into NFTs, and they did like an Aku NFT. But even then, it's still like, okay, they put out this NFT, but what does that all really mean?
Right. What does it mean? First of all, we know as much what Zuckerberg's doing with his people as he knows, because they don't know where they're going. They're trying to go.
Like explorers almost. Like
they're explorers. You're perhaps familiar with American history, the pioneers and the wagons, or even if you like watched what you've seen, like a John Wayne movie where the wagons would go. And the pioneers ended up with arrows in their back, right? You've heard that. Pioneers, arrows in their back. Nothing against Native Americans, but the pioneers had it coming.
Right.
I'm just saying it. They were like intruding, but when you're intruding in technology and that sort of thing, the arrows come from different places. And the biggest arrow is the clock, the time, the calendar, because if you're ahead of time, it's not the first people who get there. If so, AOL, you've got mail. Remember that? Where are they now? They still exist. They merged with, I lost a lot of money because of that, because they merged with Time Warner, which owns CNN. We had just gotten Time Warner stock options, right? Which were going to be like worth something. Then the AOL merger came along because we thought AOL was the future and had, technology and the future. And all of a sudden, after a very short time, the stock price went from $100 to $10 or $9 or $8 because AOL was not the future. They were a walled garden, right? And that's not what it was. Now we bring you to the metaverse. Have you read this book?
Not yet.
Oh, you got to order it. Get on Amazon right now or someplace. Matthew Ball, The Metaverse. For those who can't see, it's a book, The Metaverse and how it will revolutionize everything. There are like 10 or 15 pages on NFTs and Web3, that sort of thing, because it's a part of what the metaverse can exist without Web3. Web3 can exist without metaverse. Web3 doesn't have to be 3D. Metaverse, by definition, would be 3D, like with the Oculus headsets as one of the first things. But so much has to come together. When you read this book, it will tell you basically what I've been telling you, is that it takes time. And when will all these things come together? You got to have hardware, bandwidth, acceptance, that kind of thing. I think the easiest thing will be acceptance, because one thing that we've seen over the last 2 decades is people accept new things real quickly now.
Well, let me push back on that, because so the NFT space is, when the Wild Wild West is the perfect description of it, because there are scams daily. People are getting their wallets hacked. There's projects that are raised in value and like people can make a lot of money, then people buy it and then they go to zero. We call them rugs. Social media. So like if I go back and do your idea of this timeline, like there's this moment with the internet where Bryant Gumbel, famously is like,
right. I loved it. About once a month I watch that clip of them saying the internet. What's that? And what's that? Is that an about sign?
Yes.
Or,
yes.
What is email?
Then there's that moment, and then the internet booms, in 2000, and then you have the social media, the Web 2, and I can distinctly remember like the younger generation adopts it, but my mother is sitting there saying, "Why would anyone want to be this?" Why? And of course, now my mom is on TikTok 24/7, but there is always these growing pains, and while I think the gap keeps getting smaller and smaller, we see it with the adoption of like just users. Like, so if you like, it took Facebook, and I'm just going to throw random numbers, but it took Facebook like 4 years to get to 1 million users, and then it took Snapchat
because they limited themselves to college campuses, which they added one at a time.
But Chat GPT comes out and within a week has 1 million users. So the adoption
and the new Bing one, I just got approved for the beta testing of the Bing thing. So
so the adoption's coming
fast.
But Web3, I would, it's older than 2-3 years, but this is 2 years.
Web3 is not Web3 is not it's not a consumer product,
right?
In that sense, Web3 is an element, from what I understand, is an element that is going to fit into everything in the future. I have a 8 and 9-year-old. I got 8 grandson and a 9-year-old granddaughter. My 9-year-old granddaughter is obsessed with things like Aku. I don't know if she's familiar with that particular one, but she told me she wants to be a TikTok influencer. She wants to create art. She wants to build, like Roblox. She builds things. She's 9 years old. And so I sat her here in my office a few weeks ago, and had a talk with her about how what she's doing today will make her successful 10 years from now. And what has to happen before the things she's doing now. Of course, at 9, you don't have to be too successful,
Right.
you know. It's not make or break for her at age 9. She might think it is. But she was excited when I told her what I thought was going to happen. And I don't just make this stuff up. Part of the ideas I get from like reading books like The Metaverse, and others just from having lived. I was born in I'm 66 this week. I'll turn 66. So it's not like it's not like I just fell on the planet. I've seen a lot of, I mean, like this, you know, this is how I used to send email, Jason. I'm holding up a 1940 portable Remington typewriter.
Basically, your office is a museum. Is that what?
Oh, yeah. Oh, by the way, I know you're recording this. You mind if I record this? He holds up a 1968 film camera. Oh, wait, let me get this for my Instagram. Holds up a flash cube and a Kodak camera. The point I'm making is I was telling her what's going to happen because she plays all these, you know, she's in all these worlds, but she has an individual login to Roblox and this one and that one. Mm-hmm. I don't know which all they are. And what she wants for, you know, her birthday and Christmas are these, you know, cards that have money on them so that she can go and buy things in that world. And right. What is it, like $1 trillion or something like that? It's, I don't know. What is it? $100 billion or something is spent every year on things that don't exist, right? Well, maybe you know the number.
You know, I mean, yeah,
digital things, digital right. Things like, you know, a face or legs or I don't know, weapons or you use in different games. What if you were able to take what you bought in that world over to that world? That really excited her.
Right.
Would that excite you?
No, I don't.
Well, you're not 9 years old.
This is the thing. Like, so, you know,
who you're talking about. What did I hear Micah talking about? 6 to 12-year-olds.
Right.
Well, she's 9. So what excites the person who's going to be living with Web3 in reality is between 6 and 12 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like you were 19 back in 20.
I mean, I can honestly say, like, if you know, I would kind of rather have a CryptoPunk than a Ferrari, you know, like, so that's a little different, you know, like to me in my world, like having this CryptoPunk NFT is a bigger like life flex than having a Ferrari. Like,
okay. So would you rather have $20,000 in crypto or $20,000 Rolex?
Well, today, like last year, for sure, crypto. You know, but yeah,
now, but then what happened to it? So you would have made a bad decision.
I would have, but only in a short-term decision. You know, it depends on where you think. Like, if it was a Bitcoin, you know, like Bitcoin is roughly around 25,000 today. So if I have a Bitcoin or a Rolex today,
this is a Bitcoin right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you know, for me, we
have to do the subtitles for the people who aren't watching on video.
I would go with the Bitcoin over the Rolex personally. So, you know, because you know, for me, like I get no real life value because I'm not a watch guy, you know, like I'm not a car guy. Like,
Jason, you wear this into a bar and the babes just come up to you.
Well, let me borrow yours.
Did they do that already? Are you married?
No.
You don't have grandkids yet?
No grandkids.
Anyway.
So, you know, time is so limited.
Well, what if you take your crypto into the nightclub? Is anybody anyway?
You know, I'm glad you bring this up because it depends on like everything, like where you're at, right? Like if you go, like we were at NFT NYC and there were people walking around with crypto pins, and there was like a rapper or something, and he had like a big gold chain, you know, and he was sitting there tweeting at the time. I forget who it was or whatever, but I just remember it coming across it, and he was like, you know, I'm wearing $100,000 chain on my neck trying to flex, and these nerds with pens of a digital cartoon, it's a bigger flex because more people now are more impressed by that digital asset improving ownership than even like a gold chain. So I'm 40 years old, so I can sit there and say, put my old man River hat on and say before the internet, but I'm still hip enough to have kind of grown up. So I'm right on that fence depending on what day of the week it is. So, it's really interesting. And I tend to go like, 10 years from now, when the teenagers are in the workforce and in, the adult life, like what's going to matter to them. And I think it'll be more of their online digital.
Yes, it will.
So,
but can you wait 10 years?
I mean, that's the game. Like certainly with Aku and Micah's vision and all the things, and this is a segue that I want to make. He has bigger visions for like just the IP and creating this cartoon character of Aku to bring to children, to inspire, to educate. It is a minority character, which is certainly underrepresented in, the Disneys, the Pixars, the Marvel universe, and things like that. You had a very close connection to really the man of, comic IP in Stan Lee. And so this was a big reason why I wanted to have you on and kind of share any kind of insight you have in like that path, in what Micah is trying to do and like what maybe he needs to do.
Okay. Yes, I knew Stan Lee quite well. Used to spend a lot of time with him in his home with him, his wife, his daughter was a good friend of mine. I did a podcast series that started the week he died. I had produced it in order to try to save his life, and he died the 2 days before we were going to launch the podcast, so we had to change it a little bit because I thought he was the victim of elder abuse. Anyway, one important thing to note, the parallel between what Micah is doing, what Stan Lee did. All of that intellectual property that Stan Lee was part of, and it was a team that really created it. He was the writer, and he would describe things, and there were artists who would actually draw these things and create them, and he was the editor. Stan created, Spider-Man, Hulk, all of that he started creating in the 30s, really, well, the 40s, really. There was World War II that he was an artist or a creator in the Army. So it was 80 years ago that he started creating the stuff that we now see on the big screen in this Marvel universe. 80 years. There were times where, comic book companies would go under, merge, be on the downslope. But they didn't really start booming until the 60s. Really. I mean, they were like a joke, just for kids kind of thing in the 40s and 50s. In the 60s, 70s, they gained more respectability. He moved out from New York to Hollywood in the 80s, I believe, and tried to start some television stuff. There's the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk television show was an early example of that, Bruce Banner, all that. And kept building toward movies. And it wasn't until, the last 25 years or so that it really became the big deal. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's all built on characters that he created in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, especially. So who knows what the characters that Micah creates, the NFTs that he's selling now, where they're going? I don't know. I'm kind of bored with the Marvel universe, have been for a while. I'd rather watch movies that have subtitles on them now, but that's me because I'm 66 years old this week, right?
What do you think? What do you think in terms of just like the representation? Because one of the things that resonates with me with Aku is, is the mission statement of like, turning your dreams into a world. the fact that it is like a young Black child, that is the poster child for this inspiration. And there's really not been anything like that, and so there was so much, the delay on putting Black Panther out, and how it would be responded and received. And then, of course, when Black Panther, the original one came out and it just crushed it. And even this recent one, Wakanda, like,
great movie. It was good. I just saw it.
Yeah. And so, like, how does that play out? Like, is it because there's part of me that's like, especially with the way that the society is today, like we kind of need this character that literally like everybody can kind of relate to. Because I'm as white as they come, but I can relate to so.
You may think I'm white, but when I heard you talking, I was thinking about this. This is my granddaughter, the 9-year-old I was telling you about. Right. I took her to see the space shuttle that's on display at the California Science Center here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Her and her brother. I bought them at the Smithsonian Institute in.
She's wearing a NASA outfit for those.
Yeah, she's wearing a NASA outfit. So, my point being that my grandchildren are Black, African American,
mm-hmm.
and as the grandfather, of course, I'm there trying to inspire them. And so I that resonated with me, the character, and I think that's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. Because even though I'm white, my family, frankly, is predominantly non-white, Black.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds a little odd, but I'm in a minority in my family. I'm the only one in my family. And so I relate to the appeal to make sure that minority children
mm-hmm.
understand their greatness and what they can become. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. But that's also in the lens of today. 10 years from now, how will we look at that? I grew up when, I was born in 1957. So I remember the whites only bathrooms and
mm-hmm.
all of that. So I've seen that long timeline, if you will. But NFTs, I don't know about the future because I don't think you know about the future of NFTs. I've sold NFTs. Our company has sold some of our content as NFTs just as an experiment. We were asked to do it by someone, and we put some content up, and it sold for like the equivalent $80-90, and now it's worth less than that kind of thing. But so yeah, I'm aware of them, but I think that they may be ahead of their time, because I think when we get this world, this metaverse and Web3 and everything really accepted and out there, and the thing, that's going to be maybe 5-10 years,
So Micah's initial foray into the Aku world was 10 chapters. So it's basically mm-hmm. like 10 video clips. They were about 45 seconds each. And it was a story that was building up. This was when I'm
familiar with the narrative. I've read about him.
So
and I know he's made some money. He's selling
absolutely
an NFT for what, $120 something thousand, right?
So the first Genesis, which is Aku walking down a hallway, he sold 1,400 and something for $1,000. So he made like 1.5 million in like 5 minutes in the first one, and then subsequently the chapter sales, I think it ended up being a total of almost 15,000 chapters thereabouts, and so that's $1,000 a pop, so like 15 million for that. So there's these two worlds. There's like the chapters, and then there's the Akutars, which are like the profile picture, your digital identity. What's interesting is with these chapters and where does this play out? What is the lifespan of the NFT? Micah created these the initial chapters as a proof of concept for the IP, to grow a community, to show interest in like that people want this. and to kind of crowdfund as well. And so I kind of, when we were talking about like, what would you rather have, a Bitcoin or a Rolex, like a digital pair of Jordans or an actual pair of Jordans. And well, this, the bet is that these chapters and these NFTs will be like the original Superman, provided Aku becomes, the next Disney or Pixar character or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like that's what we're hoping and we're betting on.
Sure.
Will that happen?
And I wouldn't bet against it because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There is a pattern, to how things evolve like that. But part of the pattern is that not all of them do.
Mm-hmm.
There were an awful lot of comic characters that you've never heard of after 1945 or 55, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's I don't know if you can be smart enough to pick which ones will, because I tell you, in the early days, in the 40s, the 50s, and even into the 60s, Stan Lee was not seen to be any kind of a genius. He was struggling, working hard, struggling, trying to make things happen. And he had no concept that this would happen. He didn't know. It surprised him. I think he had some visions, and, coming to Hollywood was one of them, thinking, like starting the Incredible Hulk television show, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other thing that's so perilous is this guy who did cause all this to be created. What did he get out of it? When he died, he was probably had an estate that I think is my best estimate, valued about $35 million.
Mm-hmm.
It should have been in the billions.
Correct.
But because he didn't realize its value, he signed away the rights, if any rights he might have ever had. He pretty well signed away. He had a contract with Disney where he was paid like $1 million a year. His wife and daughter got like $200,000 a year or something like that, in a contract with Disney. Later he tried to claw back and get some more rights, that kind of thing. But this was a guy who, when he was 94, 95 years old, was put in a wheelchair. Because I went with him to Comic-Con, like in San Diego, when he was in his late 80s and early 90s. He'd go in there. Actually, when I went with him, he wasn't in a wheelchair. He's still walking. And for hours and hours, he would sign autographs, right? And make several $100,000. But that's what he needed to do, because his daughter and his wife had really big shopping habits. I can tell you, I went shopping with them.
Yeah.
And the saddest thing was they took him to one in San Jose when he was about 90, in his last year of his life, I think it was. Yeah. And I've got video of it. I put this in my podcast, audio. He couldn't remember how to sign his name. He couldn't remember how to spell his name. And there was somebody whispering in his ear how to spell his name when he was signing. And people were lined up, many, many hundreds and hundreds of people had paid like $100 or $200 to get him to sign something. Right. Yet he shouldn't have had to have been doing that at age 95.
Right.
But he was, because he did not secure the rights, or he gave them away, or he didn't understand the value of them.
And I mean, if you look at, like, certainly the music industry is the bloodiest there is as far as rights and being underpaid. And
actually, it's kind of regulated now,
but you hear all the stories
getting rights to their songs,
Yeah. So that was kind of one of the great things about this Web3 and the ownership and like royalties and commercial rights and things of that nature. Like you could really kind of prove, that's the whole thing, is proving ownership.
Right. The chain.
Right.
I guess. Yeah. And that's an improvement. It was the wild, wild west back in the 50s and the 60s. There's arguments over who even created these characters, right? Well, this person drew this one, this person drew that one. Yeah, but Stan created the storyline.
Yeah.
Right. And I can tell you, the Incredible Hulk character was inside him. Stan had a temper. And like that, it was, and he didn't have to get bitten by a radioactive spider.
So,
and he told me that, by the way.
That's awesome. So we're kind of wrapping up here.
Yeah, let's do that.
my last kind of take is you were a Hollywood inside reporter for
Yeah.
a number of years, and my question to kind of tie this into Web3 is, you know, creating a movie, like the, Aku definitely wants like the TV show and the movie. They did sign a deal with Netflix, but it was I forget what it's actually called, but it was only for like a year, and
Some kind
they
of
had
a development.
the option. They had the option
Yeah.
for a year, and then the option went because Michael wanted to maintain his own IP. Um, the wheels that turn as far as in Hollywood, like, you know, we're constantly told like, well, it takes time, and like, you hear the stories like, someone had a script and it took them 20 years, certainly like Sylvester Stallone with Rocky. How difficult is it, or is there a way to truly play the Hollywood game where like you can fast track things?
It's very difficult.
Hmm.
I play it a little bit. I have talks with producers about the rights to a story about some things we just talked about, or some others that I have inside experience with, stories I could tell in the form of either documentaries or movies or series.
Mm-hmm.
And I do pitches, etc. And it's very difficult. And for the creator, the actual writer of it, to actually make some money, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like they're the bottom of the chain, or the bottom of the, they get like what goes down. The writers are not. No, you have to control the whole thing, and to do that in Hollywood is very rare. There's some examples of people who have done that, and I actually had the opportunity for a couple of years to work with one of them, a guy named Tyler Perry.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he's so rich, he wrote, he did everything, bootstrapped it, and amazing business deals that were groundbreaking that he did. Go and study how Tyler Perry became wealthy.
Right.
And that is a study in how to do it. And I had the fortune of being a fly on his wall for a couple of years because I was invited into his studio to do some stuff, and I was on maybe 100 episodes of one of his sitcoms with him, and on the set with several of his movies, got as a fly on the wall. And pretty amazing how he did it. And that's a good model. I would say study Tyler Perry and how he did it.
Interesting. I'll definitely have to pass it along to Mike.
We could talk about that more. That could be a whole show.
Well, Alan, to be honest, we could we
could do a whole series, couldn't we?
We really could. So
I haven't even told
and especially with all your props, like
and I didn't even get to introduce you to this guy.
He's showing a Santa Claus.
A black Santa Claus.
A black Santa Claus.
A big one.
Well, this is, I
keep him in my office to make sure he knows I'm not being naughty.
Yeah.
But very interesting. Maybe we'll do it again at some point if we haven't turned people off too much.
Well, it's interesting too, because like this whole podcast, we profile members in the community, the Moon Gods, and people that are affiliated with Aku. But I think it's very important to also bring in people, like yourself and other, what I call real life Moon Gods. And that's what I think you are. Like you helped me tremendously, but you helped a lot of kids. And like you said from the top of the show, like if you went down that, the alumni of the CNN Student Bureau, and just how many people not even necessarily had like, an actual career, but at least had a job. I graduated at Appalachian State with how many thousands of broadcasting students. And in the 4 years, I can tell you there was me, my best friend, Dice, a guy named Patrick that was a good friend of mine. And then another buddy of mine did radio. And then there was a couple other radio people that did like small local radio. But there was only 3 or 4 of us that actually ever made it onto like television, out of the 4 years that I was there, and thousands that graduated just from Appalachian. And even I bet even if you took all the interns from the summer that I was there, like we were the only ones that actually kind of made it. And Will Frampton, known him for 20 years.
He's got his own production company now. He's doing pretty good.
Yeah, but he went, Sacramento, Indiana, Atlanta. Allison Walker, she's doing great things in Orlando. There was a girl, Jana. She got a job in Alabama on TV, and then I had my career where I was, in Ireland and in South Carolina. It's I give you your flowers, sir.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And for those who are not seeing this on video, if you've never seen Jason, I would just say he's like a cross between a young John Hamm and George Clooney. So now you know what he looks like.
I still bartend part-time, and I have to, and I work at an upscale bar. And so I have to wear like the black tie and the vest. And since I've started wearing that outfit every day I go to work, someone's like, has anyone ever said you look like John Hamm?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you mean in the first season of Mad Men, right?
Yeah, in this first season of Mad Men. He's a nice guy. I've got to hang out with him before. Yeah.
Well,
but let's do it again.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you as a person and a human, but I think you definitely pointed some amazing things out for this community. For everybody that's watching, we appreciate you. Of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, especially if you made it this far. You obviously like what you see, and we're trying to spread the word for Aku and Micah Johnson's project. We're not just trying to create like a business, but we're also trying to spread a message about realizing your dreams and changing the world. So for Alan Duke, I am Jason Harrell, aka JwowLax. We will see you next time.